Obsessed with hate. Deconstructing liberalism. Liberals throw up a smokescreen to control the narrative. Liberals have us debating freedom, rights, race, and hate. But hate is introduced in terms of its manifestation as racism, oppression, slavery, and infringements of what are said to be our human rights. Liberals turn hate into support for a particular narrative. Racism is hatred of minorities, for example. This strategy is successful because it puts the person accused of hate on the defensive. No reason for the hate need be given. The victim merely needs to accuse his oppressor of hate. To be accused of hate forces us to look at our motives. Whites fall for the ploy because we have been successful as a people. We are in the position of a person who wins too many contests. We spend time and energy defending against the accusation of cheating. But hate is not an accusation which can be defended against, because the victim is talking about how they feel. To be hateful is to be perceived as having hate. It only requires the victim to feel as if we are not in their corner. We do not need to be against them, we only need not to prioritize them, to be accused of hate. Why is the argument that blacks were enslaved because they could be, not an acceptable explanation? The explanation seems to be sufficient for all other cases of slavery. But it does not work with blacks, because enslaving black people means we were not pro-black, and not being pro-black is hateful. Claiming liberals are obsessed with race might be true, but the claim plays into the liberal narrative. Being obsessed with race and racial issues does not prove their assertions are false or that their obsession is unwarranted. Whites could still be racist regardless of how preoccupied liberals are with the topic. Blacks could still be oppressed regardless of how often they opine about it. The tactic of conservatives to discredit liberals by pointing out their single-minded obsession is no more effective than the defense complaining a prosecutor is obsessed with gaining a conviction. A better question would be why blacks are obsessed with demonizing whites. We might ask why liberals determined to cast the right in a bad light. The answer has more relevance to hate than the issue about skin color. The liberals' obsession with racism is not moral nor logical. Despite what many think, their obsession is not founded on their emotional repulsion for slavery. The rhetoric on racism is nothing more than a way to legitimize their agenda. Conservatives do not look at why liberals hate racism. To question their concerns would be considered a sign of racism. The concern appears justified and even required of moral persons. To argue that hatred for slavery is unwarranted would lend credence to the claim that whites are racist. However, hate is never warranted. The left's hatred of racism is no different from racism. Hate is hate. If liberals are justified in hating a conservative because the conservative is said to be a racist, then the racist is justified in hating those who oppose him. Hate not only breeds hate, it legitimizes the hate. This is why debates only serve to polarize the two sides. Debate breeds antipathy and hate. If Joe considers it justified to hate Bill because Bill is viewed as a racist, then Bill will feel warranted to hate Joe because Joe denies his feelings. Murder is always an expression of hate. Are we to believe that murders are justified by the hate that precipitated the event? If hate cannot legitimize murder, what can it justify? The power of the liberal narrative is that they chose something we all oppose to support, then accuse their opponents of supporting something that no one advocates for. This puts their opponent on the defensive. But how do we prove to our accusers we hate slavery? How do we prove we hate discrimination? What evidence is there that we are not racist when liberals claim racists oppose liberalism? Liberals cannot prove they hate slavery or discrimination either, but by attacking conservatives, they divert attention from their own record on these matters. The knee-jerk reaction is always to assume if racism is wrong, hatred for racism is right. What liberals avoid is anyone asking if hate is warranted, even if the hate is against a past injustice? Is hate ever justified? If any hate is warranted, is not all hate equally justified? If you hate what you hate, then why am I not permitted to hate what I hate? Christians are told to hate the sin, but not the sinner. Is hate for racism and bigotry not part of this model of morality? But racism is not a sin. Sins are not tied to groups or races. If racism is a sin, then communism is a sin and liberalism is a sin. Sin is not an attribute of a group. Sin is an action of an individual. Only individuals are accountable for their actions, and he or she alone is accountable for their action or inaction. Sin is not an attribute of a group. A sin is an act of the human will. Sin is not something done by one's ancestors. We must hate the hate, not the hater. The January 6th intrusion into the Capitol by unruly protesters is a case in point. The protesters committed acts of trespass for which they have been charged. CNN and others have attempted to turn this into an insurrection. The right is made culpable for the actions of a few persons. What is worse, the actions of these few is presented as a legitimate reason to hate all those on the right. The same response occurred following the Charlottesville protests. Trump remarked there were good and bad on both sides. The comment pertained to individuals. This is always true in any and all groups. We certainly cannot make blanket statements about groups of individuals, as we never know the situation of the individual. The left made it a case of white supremacy versus victims of racism. Presented in this way made it harder to look at individuals rather than the group. Thus, CNN demonized one group and lauded the other. Individuality was lost in the morass of identity politics. The strategy of the left ought to be clear now. They have divided the world into the deserving and the dupes. The dupes are exploited for resources to buy off the deserving. To justify this shift of wealth, the dupes are turned into objects of hate. Not as individuals, but as a group. The demonization of dupes does not just justify the hate, but more importantly, justifies the rapine to which they are subjected. Hate is not an emotion, it is an activity of oppression. To dislike someone is not a hate crime. To hate someone is to devalue them. Hate is the physical act of taking value from someone. Hate is an expropriation of value without recompense. Hate is fraud or a scam. Liberals play on the right. There is a practical reason for this. The right has no need for the state. It is at least partially civilized. The left is primitive and need to be subsidized. Administrators support those who think they deserve something administrators can offer. But the only place they can acquire the things the left needs is from the right. Claims of white racism, white supremacy, and white privilege justify the hate expressed by the left, which justifies the expropriations of the left. If the left broke off all contact with the right, the accusation of racist oppression might be considered to have some merit. But this is not what happens. Individual whites are not challenged on the basis of individual actions. Whites are challenged on the basis of the fabricated history developed by the left. In the mind of the left, the fact that whites have succeeded means that they discriminated against other groups. The fact that other groups have failed to prosper means whites oppressed them. No attempt is made to explain why whites had any obligation to help others, or even why taking advantage of a situation was wrong, in the time and place it happened. It is as whites are demonized solely for their success. The fact minorities did not do as well as whites is the left's evidence for white racism. Individual history or actions are not pertinent according to the left's narrative. What matters is that one group is white and successful, and another group is black and are in need of what whites have. Therefore, says liberals, whites are racist and legitimate objects of hate. Hate is a ruse, a justification for theft. The same mental process is used by all criminals to justify crime. The liberal ruse is more elaborate but exhibits the same mental processes criminals use to justify robbing others and assaulting those who stand in the way of their robbery. The left wants what the right has and merely looks to justify their extortions. The fact some of their plans are administrative, not overtly physical as in theft, does not change the facts. Liberals rationalize freeloading by making claims of hate. To summarize, hate is a ploy that justifies theft from a target. A claim "you hate me" demonizes the target. The claim of hate leveled against a group or individual justifies the actions of the accuser against the accused. No one has a right to be loved or even liked. We are free to dislike and to hate if we so choose. Hate is not a crime any more than disgust or indifference. If hate is a crime, why is abortion not a crime? The accusation of hate is simply a ploy and justifier for extorting the accused.